Here is your WESN News on the Hour. I'm Naomi Macnish. Thanks for joining us. Here are the headlines. St. James landlord sentenced for 2012 rape. Guapo bandits fail in service station break-in. Rio Claro man takes commissioner of police to court over FUL delays. And driver killed in Point Fortin parking dispute. Now for the details. A 44-year-old landlord convicted of raping a tenant in 2012 has been sentenced to just under 7 years in prison. Mark Carvajal was found guilty earlier this month in a judge-only trial. Justice Kathy Ann Waterman Lechu began with a 12-year sentence, but reduced it for factors including Carvajal's prior good character and a $15,000 donation he made to the Rape Crisis Society. The assault occurred after Carvajal lured his tenant, who had recently moved to St. James, to a secluded area in Maraval under false pretenses. Forensic evidence linked him to the crime. Upon release, Carvajal will be required to register as a sex offender and report to police regularly for 6 years. His information will also be published on the public sex offender website. Bandits attempted to rob a service station in Guapo early Wednesday morning, but left empty-handed after failing to open a safe. The suspects broke in around 3 a.m. by cutting through the ceiling and tried to access the safe, triggering the service station's alarm and CCTV system. Police were alerted immediately, but the intruders fled before officers arrived. The safe, which had been damaged but not opened, remains intact and no items were stolen. Southwestern Division Police continue to investigate. A Rio Claro resident has been granted permission to seek judicial review against the Commissioner of Police for delays in providing details on his firearm user's license application. Michael Hernandez claims the police service failed to fully respond to his Freedom of Information request filed in August, leaving key details about his application unanswered. Justice Frank C. Prasad approved his request for review, with the case set for hearing on January 20, 2025. Hernandez argues the delays breach the Freedom of Information Act and is seeking an order compelling the police to provide the requested information within 7 days. He is represented by attorneys Genevieve Thompson and Petronilla Bazdeo. A parking dispute outside a Point Fortin supermarket turned fatal on Tuesday night, leaving a 42-year-old truck driver dead. Ronald Marcan of Tabaquite was stabbed multiple times following an argument with a man who asked him to move his delivery truck. The altercation escalated and the suspect attacked Marcan. Marcan was rushed to the Point Fortin hospital but succumbed to his injuries. The 34-year-old suspect later surrendered to police, bringing the blood-stained knife he used in the attack. Investigations are ongoing, led by officers of the Homicide Bureau Region 3. The Privy Council has ruled that extension of Police Commissioner Earle Harewood Christopher's service beyond retirement age in 2023 was lawful and constitutional. The decision dismissed an appeal by activist Ravi Balgobin Maharaj, who argued that the extension violated constitutional principles and the Police Service Commission's powers. The court found that extending a commissioner's tenure is distinct from appointing a new one and does not infringe on the PSC's role. The judgment emphasized that the extension mechanism authorized under the Police Service Act is in line with constitutional provisions and the national interest. Maharaj was represented by Anand Ram Logan, while the state was represented by Douglas Mendez and others. Well, that's news to the hour on WESN. I'm Naomi Macnish. Thanks for watching.
WESN.
personal responsibility is a concept that I think all too often many of us kind of take for granted and don't understand. Now, there's a report that a commercial flight was almost hit by a drone while on approach to land at Piarco International Airport. It was flying over South Port of Spain, I believe at 3,500 feet, and the drone was within 20 meters of the aircraft's left wingtip, which, on all practicality of air traffic control, is extremely scary. One of the things I think that a lot of people aren't necessarily considering when they hear about this is not just the concern about the loss of life with regards to the passengers and crew of the aircraft. Obviously, of course, then there's the impact of the loss of the plane itself and the safety record to our local airline. Assuming it is CAL, it doesn't necessarily have to be CAL. I don't think the report says which airline it is. But then there's also the fact that if a plane is hit going west to east, there's a lot of real estate occupied by people and property west of Piarco that it flies over. And if it was to go down anywhere, it's not just the people in the plane who are at risk, but it's the people under the plane in the path of any potential crash. Now, Minister of Works and Transport says that they may have to look into the rules and regulations, revisit them if necessary. They're not taking it lightly, and I understand that. But I think a real practical issue is the fact that there already is a law in the books. They are prohibited from flying above 400 feet. And then certain drones are restricted further to 100 feet. There's a fine on the books for drone pilots, $350,000, and not all, according to reports, and imprisonment for 5 years if they disrupt or endanger, so they don't need to cause a crash, civil aviation, or any public or private property. So it goes beyond the airline situation, but it includes civil aviation. What's the issue? Unless there's some procedural or investigative regulation tweaks in the law or processes, the actual fact that it's more or less already a crime, okay, maybe you could add on a heftier penalty if they actually cause a crash, because this just says disrupt or endanger. This does not necessarily spell out anything for, well, you don't just disrupt. That could mean delay. That could mean causing the aircraft to have to veer off, which is also tricky because, again, air traffic control. Now, I don't think our airspace is the busiest in the world, but you don't want planes having to just wing it, avoid obstacles that are not supposed to be there, assuming they could even see it, depending on the size of the drone. If it gets hit by the engine at 3,500 feet, pilots won't have a lot of time, given the altitude potentially, to remedy the situation and to ensure that it's stabilized. All you need is one bad incident to cause a plane to flip, and at that altitude, they probably would not have enough time to recover. So that could happen. You could look at maybe having an increased penalty if something actually happens to that degree. But the real issue is we have to actually arrest these people first. Which is why I say if there's a procedural or regulatory issue with regards to how you collect the evidence, how you conduct the investigation, how you lay the charges, what's the threshold, etc., fine, maybe that needs to be tweaked. And maybe that's what the minister meant. But if he was talking about the illegality of it in the first place, it's technically already there. And any changes to that isn't going to make a difference if we can't catch these people. And that's usually my observation. I have yet to hear a piece of legislation that focuses on updating the laws not to make things crimes, because a lot of the things that occur in TNT are already crimes. What we need is to update the logistical framework around them, the procedural framework around them. We have an anti-gang legislation, but apparently There are things about it that makes it difficult to prosecute known gang members who are knowingly and known to the authorities engaging in activity which is technically illegal. They know it, they have the intelligence, they know who the gang members are, it's illegal to be in a gang, and yet I think we had a news report, I can't remember, was it the first person charged under the anti-gang bill? It was such big news. Oh my gosh, we got one. That's just a charge. We ain't even reached conviction yet. So I understand the minister. It's not as though what he said was the be-all and end-all to what he meant, and he's limited to just the literal words that was reported. But this is something that I've seen or observed throughout government's proposed legislative agenda for the criminal justice system. A lot of the times we don't need crimes to be updated, but rather the framework around how we potentially prosecute those individuals might be deficient, but don't really hear anything about that. So what about training? What about new processes for the police and regulations for the police to have greater flexibility or powers where legal, patent, just, and ethical to investigate things more effectively? We don't necessarily hear anything about that. Doesn't matter how illegal we make things, if we can't actually detect the murderers, for example, then what's the point? I mean, illegal guns are all over the place. We never, almost never get the smugglers. We got to add more penalties to make the punishments harsher, but what's the point if we can't detect over half of them? All right. Sean Michael Small here this morning. A lot to get through, so we'll go straight into today's Daily Review. This is Talking Point on WESN, and our Daily Review, folks, starts off today with, well, Minister Young had a press conference. It was both interesting and typical, all at the same time. I say typical because I don't necessarily want to say something as strong as boring, but it treads on ground that I suspect may have actually been trod on before, both indirectly and directly, both rhetorically and literally. Now, there was a recent report of losses incurred by the NGC, and those losses were explained in a press conference. So there were articles talking about how the NGC is in a good position, or the NGC, well, or just to explain why there was a $1.3 billion after-tax loss for 2023. Note, we are in 2024, but, you know, doing things on time is not necessarily a strong suit. Now, essentially, it's to do with valuations of certain projects and them being overvalued. Projects which, according to the minister and the NGC, because this press conference went back into some of these details, projects which were, or contracts which were signed by the outgoing partnership administration. Now, MP David Lee, there was an article where he basically said, keep an eye out on the chairman of the NGC. Look at how bad the current government is managing the NGC. And given the fact that I think a lot of what the minister said should be on public record, and at least I believe one energy stakeholder has come out to basically say that, you know, we must not take the loss out of context, and is agreeing with the minister, I believe, on NGC's version of events. I think this is an example of the opposition once again just trying to find anything to attack with. And potentially this might come to shoot them in the foot, because if the point of origin, and again, if it is not so, it should be quite easy to disprove, right? If the point of origin is from the partnership, doesn't make David Lee's position look very convincing. Now, a couple of things he did have to say. One, he questioned the timing of this whole thing, which I actually agree with all that I just said. I agree with him saying, why are they bringing this up now? They're only making this, as we're nearing the end of 2024, this is the quote, yet they're only making this announcement. What else are they hiding at NGC, right? And he's quoted as calling the timing as suspicious. Yeah, my whole thing is, things like this, when you want to blame, and I've said this before, because the then PDP, now TPP, they did this at the right timing. We want an election, we get into office, we look at things, we see how things are going, and then we say, hey, they have some stuff that's bad that we inherited. So just know that when you see these things be an issue, it's not us. One would have hoped that the current administration, as they came into office, in all of their ministerial portfolios, would have looked what's going on. What are the current projects? What are the current contracts? What did the outgoing administration do within the last couple of months, within the last couple of years, for the whole 5 years they were there, right? Go through everything with a fine-tooth comb to find out what's going on. Because even if you are not suspicious about anything the previous administration did, at the very least, you need to, this is basic common sense, right? I need to know where we are so I could chart where we're going. Unless you're going to, you know, be like the Beverly Hills Cop 2 and drive a cement truck down the streets of a city just using the force and not actually using your eyes. Now, this should have been announced, and I do believe that one of these incidents, because I recall, and I could be wrong, the Minister of Energy or one of his peers in cabinet speaking about the staff at the Attorney General office using red ink on the outgoing AG's opinion that they did not agree with and didn't want to sign off on. So I believe it's the same incident. So we've kind of heard some of this before. But even then, before, meaning a couple of years ago, why was this not announced to us within the first couple of years of them being in office? And while this is not necessarily evidence of what might be negligence, not negligence in a criminal way, negligence as in you're just not good at doing your job. When it came to the ferry service, early on in the Keith Rowley's first term and his administration, there was issues with the ferry service. And I've said it before, I recall that there was a quote of the Works and Transport Minister saying he doesn't understand why the ferry service is in trouble all of a sudden. And I had the question, did you not look into your portfolio? Even if you didn't look into your portfolio that you inherited on day one, you have an issue 6 months to a year in. Did you not ask your people before you spoke? But it made me think that he was not aware of what was going on with one of the major line items of his ministry. And we're not talking 2 weeks after taking office. We're talking 6 months to a year in, and it was giving problems. So at the very least, at that point, that's when you should start to say, hey, we need to look into this. Because early on in the PNM's administration, there were issues with regards to oil and gas revenues. So wouldn't it make sense to just make sure you're fully aware of what's going on in the energy sector? But let's go back to MP David Lee now, and where I think this is where he's coming up short. One of the things he points out was he was criticizing the chairman with regards to his earnings. Well, he's the chairman of the NGC. I don't expect it to be a position that pays $6,000 a month. It's $114,000 a month. It is what it is, right? It would be good if he potentially could make a comparison of previous chairman. Is it significantly greater? Is it significantly unfair? Or maybe if there was some sort of direct evidence to say what he wasn't doing compared to his predecessors that made his salary seem to be, you know, overinflated because he wasn't doing the job. In what capacity? And then he goes on to say he's also spending $210,000 on overseas travel while the company struggles. So first of all, I don't think there's any third-party opinion that the NGC is struggling. let's just put it that way. In fact, their financial position, apparently, they have, I think, $5 billion in liquidity and 30-something billion in assets or something like that, right? $210,000 on travel. Okay, that's nice. We need more context than that. Where did he travel? Was he traveling with family and friends? Was he traveling with staff? Was it a 2 weeks trip to Hawaii? Or was it a few days to a major commercial center like London, New York, maybe somewhere in the Middle East? Or let's just take a local example. Did he go to meet with oil execs or his energy peers in Venezuela? Maybe in Caracas? Or did he go to Margarita for 2 weeks with no staff and a +1? I don't know. Just saying $210,000 in travel, I mean, it wouldn't, if you're in the energy business and you're traveling frequently for work, it could potentially get up there, even if you're not traveling first class or business class. Flights ain't cheap. I mean, it's not like he's just going back and forth between Tobago and Trinidad. So these criticisms, to me, seems as though he's trying to pull something out of nothing, or I wouldn't say nothing. Because there was one part that I agreed with, the timing. But that's kind of lost with all of the other things that aren't really strong enough to add to your argument, and they're weak enough to potentially detract. Meanwhile, back to the minister. Part of the press conference was saying, Minister Young was saying that we have secured the future of TNT. And this was essentially, it reminded me of the complaints or the criticisms of Kamala Harris and how she essentially would say nothing but use a lot of big words. We need more details than that to believe you, right? I would believe the AG with regards to the situation with the pension bill. I believe. Other people don't have to believe, but I am inclined to believe because it was a break from their normal defensive behavior, and he offered enough details, and he said a key phrase, I bear the responsibility. Not the staffer bears the responsibility, and we will look to discipline them. He just mentioned, they didn't say what they were doing to the staff, he said, I bear the responsibility. All of those things kind of add up to a net positive to me. But in this situation where it's more of a, look at what we did, we're so great, we're securing the future of the country. Please explain how, because we have seen the energy sector not really come through in the way that you all probably wanted it to come through in the last couple of years. So rhetoric ain't helping here. And we'll leave this topic on that. Maybe more when we come in later. Want to just hit a couple other topics quick. First, next topic, the DPP had to explain exactly why the case essentially was dropped. That is the dangerous driving charge on Suzette Martin. And essentially what was said was, after reviewing the CCTV footage, it seemed as though the young man, the victim in the accident, he essentially emerged between two parked vehicles suddenly in the path of the now DCP Martin. Now, just to be brief, I don't necessarily want to go into too much details, but I still have questions though. Is it that this footage was only recently discovered? Because this happened last year, April. To some extent, why did it take so long for someone to review the footage to then say that, well, it's going to be very hard to try to prove any sort of dangerous or reckless driving? This seems as though it could have been sorted out in a day if someone just watched the CCTV footage. If the CCTV footage, it's implied that it's that obvious that you can't just try, it's going to be very hard to prove there was any reckless driving involved by Suzette Martin. Why did it take so long, right? Because here's the other thing. I'm appalled by the fact that you could have something like this, and she's the head of the PSB at the time, and she remained the head of the Professional Standards Bureau at the time, right? Now, maybe I'm wrong, but I would think that it would make sense that if someone is charged with something, and they're in charge of something like the Professional Standards Bureau, the watchdogs to the police, that they would be suspended, and that the investigation will go through, and it should not take long to clear her of the charges, and then reinstate her. And, okay, maybe you don't announce that you suspend her. Maybe you kind of just let her go and leave for like a few days. Let the DPP kind of sort it out too sweet, because this should not have taken this long. And I could understand the father of the boy having questions, because Look at when you're now saying, well, we don't really have a case. But you charged initially, so in his mind, he's like, there had to be something there. And he's thinking that this might now be a cover-up. And to be honest, I don't think I have enough to defend the DPP's position, even though I believe him. And I do think it would be very silly for him to lie about something so easily disproven, but I haven't seen the footage. But I would assume that since the footage exists, you know, if this went to civil court or any sort of litigation, it probably would be, you know, brought out in discovery and then ventilated to the public to some degree, or at least to any sort of plaintiff. But we'll see how that goes. Of course, sometimes some people kind of bank on the fact that the common folk don't have the money to take their complaints to court. But this whole situation just kind of shows, look, transparency would have helped, because then it would be easier to give you the benefit of the doubt. But also, in practicing transparency, the communication over this case probably would have been better. Just saying. Let's move on quick to the third topic. The Privy Council has come back. One political activist was challenging the extensions to the Commissioner of Police. And the Privy Council has dismissed this case after he lost in the local courts, essentially. And he brings up an interesting point due to the Privy Council's ruling. They're saying that basically the Privy Council, I don't think it was reported as a quote, right? But they're saying that, look, executive interference and with the appointment and removal of the commissioner would be unconstitutional. But Lady Simler, who I believe is the same Lady Simler from the Auditor General's case, noted that setting the terms of service of police officers, including the commissioner, was within the domain of the executive parliament. So then now, Mr. Balgurman Maraj pointed out, so I'm not too sure if he has a specific quote that he's speaking on, or if this is his opinion on the ruling. In their conclusion, found that the President is obligated to conform to the will of the Cabinet as a result of the shortcomings of the legislation and the failure of Parliament to recognize and update these deficiencies. Now, I'm not entirely sure if that's his opinion or if that is stated somewhere in the ruling. But the fact that Lady Simler kind of brought up, technically executive interference is unconstitutional, but it's within the laws of the land. I think it really, we should be asking more questions, questions that technically Karen Shishera has asked on this desk multiple times. To some extent, how could we call it independent if the Privy Council is basically saying the executive has the rights to, let me get back to the specific. The executive essentially has the rights, or the Service Commission has to take their direction into consideration. And to what extent, because they said executive interference is unconstitutional, that's part of Lady Simler's remarks. How do we, to some extent, kind of deconflict this situation? I have no idea. But it's within the law. It's legal to extend ELA. And the AG has come out to say, you see, we were right. Government was right. And I'm not necessarily buying that. It's legal. But I don't think the report is saying that it demonstrates Cabinet's commitment to the national interest. I think more of an explanation is needed before we can accept that extending Erla Christopher is within the national interest by the Police Service Commission. And she could potentially be extended by another year. But this is a new Service Commission, and they are potentially going through or starting the process once again. But their predecessors did the process in the last year and came to the same conclusion. And I don't necessarily know. Let me just put it this way. One of the things that I am concerned about is that maybe one of the reasons that we do not see a good job performance from certain areas of the police service is that productivity, merit, job performance may not necessarily be promoted or be the reasons why people get to the top officers in the service, and it sets a bad example for the people underneath. Because as much as I am more than willing to accept that, look, just because there are questions about DCP Martin on other matters doesn't mean that she's necessarily guilty in this reckless driving case. But there are questions about the Brent Thomas affair. But then again, I think, and we've said this before, how could she have done that on her own, gotten a character complaint on her own? She probably had approval from somewhere above her. We don't know who or what office that might be. But it's a hell of a thing if political reliability is one of the main reasons that gets you promoted. It shouldn't be so in the police service, but it shouldn't even be so in the public service. And yet, could anyone tell me that they know for certain across the board it is definitively not so in the public service? I don't have the confidence to say that myself, so I can't say it. I hope if someone else could say it, then call in later and you could have your say. Let's take a break, and when we come back, we will welcome my co-host. Stay tuned.
Simon's Musical Supplies Limited. We are the specialist in new and used musical instruments, carrying top brands like Yamaha, Pearl River pianos, Meinl and Sabian cymbals, Remo and Evans drumheads and Fender guitars, just to name a few. Also a wide assortment of music books, pan and accessories. At Simon's, we service what we sell. Trust the leader. Call us now at 625-6412 or visit us at 20 Board Street, Port of Spain.
Having trouble Christmas shopping? Check out the Kids Shop today. For all your officially licensed kid character merchandise, we carry characters such as Disney Princess, Frozen, Spider-Man, Paw Patrol, Sonic, My Little Pony, and much more. Call or visit us on Facebook or Instagram. Nationwide delivery available. The Kids Shop, for all your licensed kids character merchandise.
Do you need treatment for obesity or any related abdominal procedures? The community hospital now offers minimally invasive laparoscopic surgery done by an American-trained, board-certified surgeon with over 20 years' experience.
Give us a call at 235-5479 for more information.
The Community Hospital of Seventh-day Adventist,
where good private health care is affordable.
Transform your home with PCU Plus. From stylish furniture to the latest appliances, we have everything you need to create your perfect space. At PCU Plus, we offer fair prices and affordable financing options that are cheaper than hire purchase agreements. With convenient locations in San Fernando, Tobago, Arima, and our lifestyle showroom in Barataria, you're never far from the best deals. Visit PCU Plus today and discover why we're the top choice for quality furniture and appliances. PCU Plus. Quality you trust, prices you'll love. Visit one of our locations or find us online to start transforming your home today.
If these walls could talk, they'd cry uncle. They didn't plan to become offices or yoga studios. But they've stood by us, even when we got a little stir-crazy. For that, they deserve some thanks. They deserve Benjamin Moore.
Welcome back to Talking Point, ladies and gentlemen, and joining me is my co-host of Talking Points. I am legally obligated to say this because his name is in the credits. Mr. Keaton Shah. Keaton, good morning.
You're not obligated. You're not obligated to say anything, Joel Michael Small. My name may be in the credits, but that does not necessarily mean that you have to give me credit. So, but good morning, good to see you.
No. I've read the fine print of my contract. I'm legally obligated to welcome my host. Now, that's my story.
Wait, hold on. You have a contract? Oh, where's mine?
Let's not talk about things anyway. Let's not talk about things in the same category. Anyway, let me not make that joke. Yes, you never know who's listening. It wasn't a bad joke, folks. I promise. Now, a lot to get into. I want to start off. We could get to some of the other interesting communication faux pas later, but I want to start off with something that's very interesting, because it almost as though to kind of make me look bad and make me look wrong, and I guess to some extent maybe I am wrong. The COP has a new interim leader. They have brought back Prakash Ramadan. I say brought back because apparently the outgoing interim leader had to convince him to come back, basically saying, well, you know, your family lives here, right? And apparently, according to Mr. Sinet, that's what got him to come back. Now, with that said, the reports, what I think, I tried to see if there were other reports on this, if there was other news on this. I didn't necessarily look for press releases from the political parties themselves, because the report states that the new leader, there's replaced the old leader of the COP, who is now fully part of the Progressive Alliance, which includes the NTA and HOPE. And it does not necessarily mean that they will not work with the UNC in the future, but it does mean two things. One, they want any sort of alliance to include Guy Griffith, but also two, there were calls of, from one of the deputy political leaders of HOPE for the dissidents to join their Progressive Alliance, the UNC dissidents. So the politics of the coalition building, Keita, and I find to be very interesting, given how it has played out so far, and also there are things that I know that you and the public might infer or pick up on, but I can't necessarily outright directly say it. Keaton, your thoughts?
Well, it seems to be a bit of a feeding frenzy when it comes to who can get who, which player we can get in our team, or which players are on our side. But the developments coming out of the Congress of the People, quite interesting indeed. Now, I've interviewed Kirk Sinnott before, and he's held the position of interim political leader since 2020, if I'm not mistaken. And that was following the departure of Carolyn C. Prasad-Bechan as political leader. Now, the thing is, you know, well done to Mr. Sinnott for holding the fort from 2020 to 2024, but he never really did anything as political leader, interim political leader. And even in the interview with him, he seemed to have very little sense of a direction as per where the party was heading. So there may have been a need for a stronger face, a more recognized face, and a more recognized voice when it comes to the leadership of the Congress of the People, if they are to be considered a player in this entire game that is coalition building. I mean, beyond that, when Prakash Ramadan was political leader of Congress of the People, what did he really do to take the party from the shadows of the People's Partnership, a government led by the United National Congress's political leader, Kamala Prasad-Bisesa? What did he do to transcend it to something a bit more boisterous? And we never really got that from him. And he exited the position. That being said, if I am to believe the words of Louis Lee Singh, an individual who up to, I believe it was last year's local government elections, was highly critical of Gary Griffith, extremely critical of Gary Griffith, and did not have very nice things to say about Gary Griffith. Coming on this show and saying that everyone deserves a second chance, everyone deserves another opportunity, then similar sentiments can be expressed of that of Prakash Ramda to the position of the Congress of the People as well. Maybe things may have been different this time. The dynamics of Prakash Ramana's relationship with the COP and by extension the executive, we will know very little of. But the story as per how he got to this position, as related by Mr. Sinet, is indeed how it got to this point is again, to use your word, to copy that word, is very much interesting from the aspect that it was expressed initially that there was some hesitation on the part of Prakash Ramda. Kirksonet indicated that Prakash Ramda's daughter lives in Trinidad and Tobago, and 1 week later, he said, I'm up for it. So he came on board because according to the party's constitution, a political leader, or I guess in this case, an interim political leader, is allowed to appoint a deputy political leader or an interim deputy political leader. That transpired. Once that became the case, Prakash Ramada as interim deputy political leader, Kirksonet resigned as interim political leader, leading the way forward for Prakash Ramada. So it was strategically formulated. No, it wasn't strategically formulated. It was just simply the party's constitution that they were adhering to. And it's good to note that they were adhering to the party's constitution as it relates to the executive leadership. Moving forward to this progressive alliance, and this is where I said it seems to be a bit of a feeding frenzy when it comes to which players we have on whose coalition. The thing is, I'm still trying to figure out if the dynamics of the relationship, if all three parties, be it the NT, Hope, and the COP, are on the same page. It's a bit confusing to me. At one point, you have Gary Griffith indicating that there will always be an olive branch, and he is still willing to work with the United National Congress. You hear that from his part, and he's indicated that they will be the bridge for constituencies and for undecided voters. He's indicated that. Then you hear from Hope, whose political leader, Timothy Hammer-Smith, just earlier this week on WESN, indicated that it's interesting times and we await to meet with the opposition leader in January to see exactly what's on the table in respect to coalition. But then a deputy political leader of Hope comes out and says, well, the so-called dissidents, come and join us. Come and be a part of our party. The Congress of the People, interim political leader, then Kirksonet, met with the United National Congress, but he said nothing was ever agreed upon and no coalition was formed. So though there is a progressive alliance, that relationship and whether or not they're all on the same page needs to be ironed out. The thing coming from the COP, though, is that if we are to join the United National Congress, Gary Griffith must be a part of it. The NT needs to be a part of any coalition. That is a profound statement. That is incredible because it shows, I think, not necessarily the confidence in Gary Griffith and not necessarily him being highly regarded on the part of the Congress of the People, but rather the pull that he still has and the reputation that he has within the public domain because of his personality and because of his aggressive approach to dealing with serious situations in Trinidad and Tobago. So I still think the relationships need to be ironed out. I still think the communication with the public sphere needs to be ironed out. But it's really interesting developments over the last 2 weeks in respect to the formulation of a coalition. And election season is heating up because, not to digress, but I'm still awaiting to hear from other political entities such as the Patriotic Front and as to whether or not they consider themselves a political entity or whether it's just a political personality in Michaela Pandey. And even in respect to the MSG, what's happening there. Yeah. But who knows? It's still quite early. I think January is going to be a very fun time for political analysts and political scientists.
One of the things is that we should also point to is the fact that, look, it seems like this election, I don't know if anything similar happened in 2020. I don't think so, right? But just look, you have Vasan Bharat coming out after all of the back and forth between him and Kamala, looking to join back with the UNC. Now Prakash Ramada is looking to join back with the COP. Jack Warner I remember when trying to book him for a previous show, Bread and Butter, for you, Keaton, and your co-host, Jack Warner's, people said, well, he's not really appearing in media. And now, you know, he came out for the internal election, did an appearance, now he wants to come back in full for this general election. It's almost as though there is a sense that this general election has a significant importance. But one of the things that I lament is the fact that if individuals and individual merit and the individual candidates were held to a greater importance within our electorate, then these moves would be earth-shaking. But because it's primarily party politics first, I'm not entirely sure how all of this is going to translate with regards to the effect it's going to have in the next election. Because I'll say this, I've said this before, Keaton, my hope, no pun intended, would be all of these other parties to just get one seat. Because by getting one seat, it gives them a seat at the table and it solidifies their legitimacy, like what the second election for the COP did for the COP before they kind of, and I believe to some extent under Prakash's stewardship, kind of threw it away with regards to how they treated with the relationship within the partnership. And moving forward, that could be a dynamic change in the election results that might shake things up, as opposed to just merely voting in the opposition, voting out the PNM, and just swapping places, 2218 or what have you, 2318, just the other way around. I don't think we'll see much change if that happens, but if the dynamics change from Tobago and from these other parties gaining ground, and then now it's not easy for either of the two larger parties to have a majority to form the government, all of a sudden, there's a window to really try to push for some significant change. What do you think about that?
I think that the next election, and I'm basing this off of what we've learned thus far, the dynamics are going to be quite interesting, because if one seat in Tobago swings from the People's National Movement, let's just say to the TPP, and I think we're looking at that Tobago East seat more than the Tobago West seat for that indication, then the dynamics of the election alone is going to be interesting, let alone if in Trinidad the NT takes one seat or two seats, or Hope takes one seat, or any of these opposition parties take a seat. And the thing is that how our political, how our parliament is set up, how our parliament is structured, is it that we're going to see a coalition forming before the election? Because all this talk about some coalition, that has not been finalized. There's certainly steps and building blocks towards that. Or are we going to see a coalition forming after the election? And I think that is something that Timothy Hammersmith also alluded to, that it might be ideal if there was a coalition following the general election rather than before. But that also, that you see, that's a possibility as well. If Tobago swings one seat in favor of the Tobago People's Party, and if other parties in Trinidad and Tobago take seats away from the PNM or even away from the UNC, doesn't matter. If there is no clear majority at that particular point, if there's absolutely no clear majority at that point, the dynamics are going to be interesting, because you're going to have, it can be so many options, it could be so many aspects and so many different, as I said, how Parliament is set up. So even if a coalition is formed after the election, dependent upon what transpires, that's going to be interesting how that pans out, in the sense that Kamla Persad-Bissess is saying that there is the potential for this coalition that they're currently working for or working towards to be stronger than the coalition of the People's Partnership following the Faisalabad Declaration back in 2010, because there's simply more time for discussions to be held. And it seems as though she has an idea of the election date already. If she's saying that there is more time, the Prime Minister can call the election anytime he wants to, only he knows that date. But we're basing all of this on the assumption that the People's National Movement, they're going to lose footing, they're going to lose ground. We're also basing that on the assumption that they might not actually gain one or two seats. And that is always a possibility. regardless as per whether or not the PNM has performed, however you like to judge them over the last 4 or 5 years. For this administration in particular, a coalition does not necessarily equate to you automatically winning an election. There is still work to be done.
The thing is, I do think, and of course, this is not an absolute guarantee, right? That doesn't mean that it has to happen, but I do think that Tobago will lose both Tobago seats personally. However, I think you're right. Any other political force on the scene may take votes from the UNC. They may take votes from the PNM. We don't necessarily know how that's going to swing. What I do think is interesting, and to some extent, you bringing up the fact of making coalitions after the election may have preemptively answered this question already. But I do want to ask, do you think it's good for the Progressive Alliance to join with the UNC and its partners? Because if they do that, the assumption would be, well, there's not going to be able to get to a formal agreement with the TPP and Tobago. And just in general, would you want to see them join with the UNC and try essentially Partnership 2.0, right? Because there's a part of me, I don't know how that will work, given both Gary Griffith being in the Progressive Alliance and Philip Edward Alexander being with the UNC's coalition. Those two people, they've had their differences publicly, but also the UNC has its difference directly with Gary Griffith. So even if they do come together, and then to some extent, might it be better that we see something a bit independent of the PNM UNC and not necessarily include those two, at least before the election? Maybe post-election, you know, practical considerations might be given greater weight then.
Well, there's so many answers to your question, and I'll try and be as concise as possible. First of all, for the United National Congress to be considered as a viable entity or alternative to what TNT is currently experiencing, they should not be dependent on other parties or other opposing parties to be refreshed. In other words, they need to sort out their internal issues and perhaps invigorate the party with fresh, younger, more dynamic thinking individuals than what is currently have. They should not be dependent on other political institutions to be considered as refreshed, reinvigorated, and ready to bring about change. That is one aspect of it. I don't see the harm in any coalition, though. What I do see there being more so of a critical area that needs to be sorted out is exactly the leadership dynamic. You have Gary Griffith, who's a very strong-minded individual and very much a force as a leader. And that doesn't necessarily mean a positive thing. It doesn't necessarily mean a negative thing either. The thing is, Gary Griffith has been the face of the NTA, and you get the impression that no one dare says anything that opposes his position, his opinions, or his stance. With that sort of strong-minded leadership, you've got an individual in Kamla Pasabi-Sessa who seems to be a very weak political leader, who seems to be now. Bear in mind, I've always said give credit where credit is due, and I think the UNC in the last couple of weeks have done quite well to raise certain issues and to stand very strongly on certain issues. But that being said, Kamla Pasabi-Sessa could be seen as a very weak leader, with individuals in the party controlling how the party operates and not necessarily the political leader. And then you've got individuals in for example, in Hope. Timothy Hammersmith is the political leader, but then you've got Karen Yunus-Teixeira and Louis Lee Singh. And let's be honest with you, Louis Lee Singh is a strong mind as well, and sometimes you dare not oppose him either, because in his mind he is probably always right. So then when you have these individuals coming together, and let's not forget Philip Edward Alexander of the PEP. I'm trying to figure out, with this Progressive Alliance joining the United National Congress, the possibility of that, what does that mean for Philip Edward Alexander and the PEP? The PEP no longer seems to be a party, but it seems to be Philip Edward's party more than anything else. It seems to be just his face, and I don't understand how an individual resigns as political leader and then comes back and says, no, sorry, I'm taking it back. I don't know how that works, but I don't know the PP's constitution. When you have all these strong-minded individuals and hard-headed individuals, exactly who is going to lead? And that's a question I asked Gary Griffith last year, leading up to the local government elections, and he always says precedence will be given to the party with the I believe he alluded to the more votes or the more seats or the more individuals that really forming a part of the party's operation. So he was suggesting that as Kamala Persani says so. Listen, if we learned anything from the People's Partnership in 2010, these are the lessons that have to be sorted before a coalition should be agreed upon. Because you don't want a situation or you don't want circumstances where there are going to be issues that reflect not only badly in respect to public relations and in respect to leadership, but it also can potentially lead to the crumbling of a coalition. You don't want that happening. So my question really is whether or not the UNC sees this as them reinvigorating and reinventing themselves, which should not be the case. And two, who's actually going to be the leader? Who's going to be the one to lead these coalitions?
Here's the thing, Keaton. First of all, Shane Mohammed, I think, Dr. Shane Mohammed had similar commentary. He thinks the UNC needs to do better to reinvigorate themselves, refresh themselves. He didn't use those words, but essentially all was saying similar things, and their margin for error is very small. But here's an interesting thought. Let's just say the election works out, it's a two-sided race, and it's 2020. The TPP only wins one seat, they win Tobago East. It's 2020. I understand where Gary Griffith came from. You would think, okay, whoever has the most votes will lead. But what happens now when the TPP is like, well, you know, you can make us prime minister and we'll give you our seat. Can you say no to that? Can you say no to that? Can you say no to that?
I don't.
Because what happens if they want to agree up front and then derail it later? Then people could just say, well, we could go the other side. You know, it's the majority of parliament. If you no longer have the support of the majority of parliament, you can't be prime minister anymore.
Well, the interesting dynamic is, the TPP is not considered a national party.
They don't need to
because they're focusing solely on Tobago. But could I make that argument as well for the United National Congress? Because they're focusing only on Trinidad. They're not contesting the seats in Tobago. You know, they're not contesting those two. So could I make the argument that the UNC is not a national party? It's only a party for Trinidad. But I highly doubt if I've got one seat in Parliament that I'm going to make the argument, well, make this individual the Prime Minister. I don't know if that could be agreed upon.
I mean, this is assuming that the TPP is willing, and it might be a tall order to convince anyone that they would be willing to do this. But they could look at the non-PNM side, because we assume the PNM are not going to have any alliances, and basically say, well, we could just go with them. We'll just go with whoever gives us what we want.
Yeah, I don't see the TPP joining forces.
I mean, it's an extreme example. It's an extreme example.
No, I know it's an example.
But on a practical level, it's possible. It's possible, right?
If it comes to that point,
if they want autonomy, Keaton.
2021.
If they want autonomy, Keaton.
It's 2021, Sean.
Keaton, wasn't essentially that's how Robinson essentially rose to prominence? Not as the guy with the most support, but the guy with the swing support. The guy whose support basically would turn the situation one way or the other. Is, you know, I think to some extent how he became prime minister, maybe not necessarily directly so, but also when he was president, he essentially did that. So, I mean, it's not impossible, right? And I say that not to say that this is probable, but just to show it's not down to who has the most votes necessarily, right? With regards to who might lead the coalition, but rather whose votes is really the fulcrum by which this whole thing could go. Who has the most leverage, for better or worse? And if you want autonomy, what better way to get it than have your own prime minister?
It's not impossible, I know Sean Michael.
It's impractical, though. It's very
improbable.
It's very impractical, too.
It's not even impractical.
It's very impractical.
It's not impossible. It's improbable.
Could you imagine a TPP prime minister with a cabinet made up of only UNC
Or
and other
PNM. I
people.
don't think they'll
Or
join
PNM.
the PNM,
Yeah,
but it's, as you said, it's highly improbable.
the
I'll
cause
tell you
of
one
puppet
thing,
will
Joe
come
Michael Small,
immediately.
on the night of election, our analysis might not end. We would be scratching our heads and wondering what is really going on here. What are we going to wake up to tomorrow morning? But that's just the thing. It's a critical election, and we've said this in the last election as well, the last general election. I mean, WSN was not around for that last general election, but in conversations, we kept saying the last election is going to be critical simply because it lays the path towards the transformation of Transabago's future, and how we are going to diversify what we already have existing. We can't say that between 2020 and 2025, we're going to do the same old, same old. Well, guess what? That's exactly what happened, which makes this election in 2025 even more critical. And you can tell that elections are in the air. Look at what transpired earlier this week in respect to Minister Donna Cox and this whole pension scheme. And this is where I said the United National Congress did something which I find rather brilliant, and I'm glad they stuck to the point. And I'm going to digress now away from the coalition dynamics.
Well, hold on. Before we do that, I do want to take the break now, but I just want to say, with regards to the COP's leadership, it was probably one of the best political messaging that I've seen in quite some time, and I don't know if they'll really be able to take advantage of it. But just to reiterate the point, Sinet added about Prakash Ramadan, he was somewhat hesitant to get back into it, but I reminded him of his daughter living in TNT and the state of the country. A week later, he told me he'd take it up. I think that's something that would resonate with a lot of people and a lot of voters, but I don't know if it could, I don't know if it would, and I don't know if it would strike that much of a chord. Let's take a break. When we come back, we'll switch gears to that whole situation, and we'll open up the phone line. Stay tuned. This is Talking About WSN, and we'll be back after this.
Transform your home with PCU Plus. From stylish furniture to the latest appliances, we have everything you need to create your perfect space. At PCU Plus, we offer fair prices and affordable financing options that are cheaper than hire purchase agreements. With convenient locations in San Fernando, Tobago, Arima, and our lifestyle showroom in Barataria, you're never far from the best deals. Visit PCU Plus today and discover why we're the top choice for quality furniture and appliances. PCU Plus. Quality you trust. Prices you'll love. Visit one of our locations or find us online to start transforming your home today.
Bill and Ruth fell in love with the Benjamin Moore Color Dry Sage, but they tried to match it using another brand's paint.
I mean, it's close enough.
Almost identical, really. Yeah, there it is.
Never trust another paint to be a Benjamin Moore color.
Having trouble Christmas shopping? Check out the Kids Shop today. For all your officially licensed kid character merchandise, we carry characters such as Disney Princess, Frozen, Spider-Man, Paw Patrol, Sonic, My Little Pony, and much more. Call or visit us on Facebook or Instagram. Nationwide delivery available. The Kids Shop, for all your licensed kids character merchandise.
Simon's Musical Supplies Limited. We are the specialist in new and used musical instruments, carrying top brands like Yamaha, Pearl River pianos, vinyl and Sabian cymbals, Remo and Evans drumheads and Fender guitars, just to name a few. Also a wide assortment of music books, pan and accessories. At Simon's, we service what we sell. Trust the leader. Call us now at 625-6412 or visit us at 20 Board Street, Port of Spain.
All right, folks, just before we open the phone lines, Keaton really wanted to get into this, so I must give him at least a few minutes with regards to the whole pension situation and the defense, which I could understand why it happened, but it's still a bad look. Minister of Social Development, Keaton is confused, right? Minister of Social Development, Donna Cox, defended the legislation, I believe, when questioned by reporters, only to then have the Attorney General come back and essentially kind of make that whole defense redundant and unnecessary when he said that there was a mistake.
Stop talking. Stop talking for a moment. I'll tell you why.
What?
How could you say you understood how it happened or why? How could you
It's
say...
very simple, Keaton.
No.
She was not aware of what she was speaking about when she spoke about it, and she just defaulted to...
No, she was very much aware of what she was speaking
I don't think so.
Listen.
This is not a defense, huh? This is not a defense.
Give kudos where kudos is due. Because the United National Congress brought it forward before it reached Parliament. And for that, good. Well done on their part. And they stuck to that issue, right? But Donna Cox, when contacted by the media, defended it. She defended it. Now, she's the line minister. What was she referring to as the pension? Was she referring to the grant? Exactly what is it that she's referring to? But that's one thing putting aside for the movement.
How did it... it being labeled as a pension is a major mistake.
Right? Then, and that's the line minister. And then you go on to defend it, saying people are taking advantage of the system. If they have $25,000 in savings, then we don't think they're applicable. I can't understand that. If I work all my life and I save my money so that I can be comfortable in my retirement, what are you going to do? Are you going to be actually every month evaluating how much money I have in my bank account?
No, the threshold is low, but I understand the principle behind what she said. It's just that, one...
I can't understand that,
I do understand it. It's just that, one, she seemed to, in hindsight, not be fully aware of what's going on for whatever reason, which that's bad, number one. And two, the Attorney General had to say, well, a staffer added it in. And I would just like to know... Hold on, wait, Keaton.
Adding to the silliness.
No, Keaton, you do understand. When the Attorney General says that, let's just take it at face value. How many other times have this happened? How many other times are they not aware of what's going on? That's the implication of the Attorney General's words. It's not a better situation.
To deal with Sean this morning.
No, you're misunderstanding.
Defending the defense.
No, I'm not. Keaton, if you pay attention to me, you would understand I'm not defending it. I'm saying the Attorney General's versions of events has wider, worse implications with regards to how government business is done. So if you want to take it at face value, then is it that they have no control over how these things are written? That's what I'm saying.
This was raised by the United National Congress because it was going to Parliament via cabinet note. Who takes the cabinet note to Parliament? Who takes the cabinet note to Parliament? I'm asking you that question. Who takes the cabinet note to Parliament? It is going to be the minister. And I would hope that the minister knows exactly what are the details of those in that cabinet note before taking it to cabinet. I would hope so. But then to go and defend it and to give a reason or an explanation, which in my opinion suggests that government ministers will not be allowed for pension. And this is based off of what she's saying. Because again, was she referring to a grant? Was she referring to pension?
No,
exactly
but
what is it she was referring to?
Keaton, when you look at the details of how she described it, unless she really didn't know what she was talking about, she was talking about a grant. And if it's a grant, then I understand the principle of the matter, although 25,000 still seems too low of a threshold even for that, one could argue, right? Because
you
life
shouldn't
savings
tell
of
me how much money that I have
doesn't
in my
matter.
savings, etc. Because honestly speaking, if emergency health bills come up and I have to seek medical attention from a private hospital, or if in my old age an accident happens and I need to get certain equipment in my house, or I need to do repairs to my roof, or the plumbing system,
but Keaton,
I can't get medication by a CDAP, I have to buy
this grant, Keaton, the implication is this grant is not meant to be universal, which again, the first error was calling it a pension because I have no idea why you're calling it a pension.
Before we digress, because I want to, before we go any further, for the Attorney General to come and say he takes full responsibility, okay.
What does that mean?
To then say it was a public servant who made a mistake because I was out of the country. How could it be a mistake? Your minister defended it. Your minister, and again, I can't say it's just a public servant because at the end of the day, the minister is the one who's responsible for taking it to cabinet. She would have very much been aware of that. She defended it. So at the end of the day, Shawn Michael Small, as far as I'm concerned, given the history of what has transpired over the last few years, in respect to when the government says we are not going to do this or we have no intention of doing it, a year or two later, or not even a year or two, maybe 6 months later,
Yeah, that's true.
keep an eye on this. But you see, they had to change their position. It was, in my opinion, this was deliberate. They had to change their position because it wasn't a mistake, but because of the public backlash, and they can't afford that going into an election year.
If that was true, I would be very surprised at the speed of changing the decision because there have been just as much controversial topics where they have defended for days and weeks and fought down and in some cases ignored public criticism. Meanwhile, in this one, it lasted a day. Here's the thing though, there's no scenario where I accept, oh, it's just an honest mistake because I truly believe, right? I have no problem with the Attorney General taking responsibility. I actually wonder if he is basically saying, I'll take the responsibility because I ain't doing this again. This is it for me. This election happening and I'm out. And I would understand if he says so because I don't think he's built for politics. But I don't think we could just chalk this up to a mistake by a staffer because the implication of this mistake or intentional action, which is another possibility for different motivations, is that the business of writing and presenting legislations is not within the full control of the government. And what else has potentially slipped through by mistake? What else might be compromised by a mistake? And that, to me, is a much more concerning situation than whatever poorly written legislation that they were going to present to Parliament this week or last week or next week.
Hey, Shawn Michael Small. It's been a very strange week in TNT. We're defending the actions or chastising the actions of the fire service. In my opinion, even in respect to that, why it hits home. That's why there's such a reaction. But when an individual has lost their life in a fire because the fire services have not made it on time, why isn't there probe then? That is something to consider. Now, a government minister has lost her life and that of her 2 children, and we're having a probe, and I'm really sorry for the circumstances surrounding it. But this is a probe that should have happened years ago, Then to this entire situation with the pension, that in itself has formulated a distraction away from the issues of the Trans-Tobago Fire Service. But then that's another issue on itself with this pension scheme or grant scheme or whatever it is. And then fast forward now to this situation, I say with Stuart Young, blaming the People's Partnership government for actions in 2013 that led to NGC declaring a loss of 1.3 billion in 2023. It's been such a... has it been a strange week or is it just another week in paradise?
You have to say it correctly. NGC declares a loss in 2023 at the end of 2024 because of actions in 2013. The timing is just, are we on the ball or are we not on the ball? Do we know what's going on? Doesn't seem like we're always aware, and by we, I mean the government, not just the PNM, but the government, right? They're aware of exactly what's going on. And they're in charge, so one would hope they would know what's going on. Just saying.
One would hope.
One would hope. Folks, the phone lines are technically officially open, so you can call in and have your say. Last chance for the week. Of course, we're winding down as we get to Christmas. A lot has happened. I haven't even asked Keaton his opinion on further on Stuart Young's press conference and if he accepts the explanation. But it's a hell of a way to live when one controversy is distracting us from a previous controversy, like a daisy chain of controversies. There's a lot to be said. Call in and have your say. The phone number's on your screen. But Keaton, am I wrong to think that the Attorney General's explanation doesn't open wider questions of concern? That's what I took from it.
Of course, it opens wider questions for concern, but sometimes you have to read through the manure to actually try and realize and figure out, hold up, wait, this is just the easiest thing to see. This is just a reasonable excuse of which we think is justified. And we've been fed that often too much, Sean, and that's why I'm saying you seeing it's opening up wider questions. So listen, it's just easy to come and say, well, it was a public servant who did this. I wasn't in the country, for whatever the reason may be. But this is not our plans. If this was not your plans, why did it make it to the cabinet notes in the first place? And why did the
Well,
minister
apparently
actually
they
defend
said
it in the
it.
first
They
place?
said it didn't. They said
You
it
know,
wasn't in cabinet
so
notes.
again,
Right? So again, the defense is trying to claim a staffer added this after cabinet. How does that happen?
really,
No,
if
no, no,
cabinet
no,
notes
no,
and a
no.
staffer added it
I'm willing to believe
after
him. I
cabinet.
would just like to know exactly how does this happen and if it's happened before. That's
Sean,
my. I would just like to know.
So you're looking at avenues to try and give a justifiable
It's not,
reason or
Keaton,
excuse.
it's not an excuse. It is greater concerns. Because what other bill has been mucked up by something like this? I would just like to know that they didn't intend to have clauses in that happen. We have Sanford on the line. Good morning, caller. You're on the air.
Good morning, Sean. Good morning, Keaton.
Good morning, caller.
Let me start starting from the last point going backwards. I totally agree with you, Keaton. Totally agree with you on this issue about this so-called, what do you call it, some public servant happened to put it in. That cabinet note, Ms. Cox defended it. And the fact that she came to defend it in the first instance says the entire story.
Yes, it does.
Let me say this also. Under Mr. Manning's tenure, his second tenure as Prime Minister, they changed the legislation from a senior, because previously it was a pension, and they changed it to a grant. It is officially a grant, even though it is still referred to as a senior citizen pension. Officially on the books it is called a grant, a senior citizen's grant. And there were implications with respect to that when it was done all those years ago, because what is said is that the government can withdraw a grant and stop a grant if it is that for whatever reason that they have. So because you're entitled to a pension, but you're not entitled to a grant. So there were implications of that, and Mr. Manning did it because he had the majority to change it without having the opposition. Needed the opposition when he was in power, the second iteration. Secondly, the NGC write-off, Sean. You said, let me say this, for NGC to come 2020 to declare the loss, and because it's a financial statement from 2023 that they now published, it is well within business to have your financial statements for 1 year in the following year. It is great, but then you see have the 2024 results, 2020 results in 2024. However, now it is not a big issue. I see that as that write-off, they would have been carrying it and they decide, let's write it off this year and declare the loss now and move ahead. It has been done by TSTT in the past. It's the same type of thing where they declare $1 billion loss and they write it off, and then the next year, because they carry it on the books, so it's just to get rid of it. I don't see it as a big deal. So the fact that the minister comes to make it a big deal, that's just semantics as far as I'm concerned. My last point is yesterday, Sean. Let me make a quote, right? Let me quote this. And I want to hear your response. I saying back to Miss Morris. She was a school teacher.
I think the caller got cut.
Whoops. Very well, there's still time.
We didn't cut you. We did not cut you, but I heard something that indicated a break. So I don't know if you.
I didn't hear the break. I just heard the call. It just stopped. Everything just stopped.
I don't know how to explain it, but like a click, not a click, but something a bit. I don't know.
Call back in. We've got time and the phone lines open.
Yeah. Well, I'm curious as to what it was with regards to the deceased MP. We actually going to send the line though. In the meantime, good morning, caller. You on here?
Good morning, gentlemen.
Voice I have not heard for quite some time. Good morning, Professor.
Yeah. The problem with this pension and deposits, they misunderstand the old colonial position. It was rent, it was the income, all income, and it would include assets that's supposed to produce our income, but was not being actually used. For example, your houses, if you live in it as an owner occupied, it was the rental value would be included. And the rental value was obtained from the property tax, because the property tax was based on rental value of the property. Right? So that in the case for deposits, what should be included is the income, the interest from it, not the full sum. And that is the mistake that the people make. But the very important thing about pension is some years ago, government said they was going to rationalize their pension. And they had international bodies advising them. And you can't hear nothing about this. One of the major recommendations that was made to them from the overseas experts was things like the National Insurance Board should be an investment by the people like you have in Canada, where you always own it and you could pass it on to your descendants, right? And that's my contribution, in case you have any questions or anything like that, or queries.
I have to be honest with you, Professor. I'm not entirely familiar with what you put forward, so I will have to do some research to get a better understanding, but thank you for raising it too.
Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you very much, Professor.
All right, I don't
know.
So
what's that confused look on your face about?
To be honest, I was trying to. I'm not entirely sure. Even the first point with regards to what was the, how did property tax, what was the relation between sort of property tax and the rental value and pensions. So
it has to do with assets and income that you can receive from assets. For example, your home. What is the potential income you can receive? From your home, etc. But that's what I said. I'm not too familiar.
Is this to qualify for the pension?
I'd like to do some more research.
Because I'm not entirely sure. Anyway, maybe as time goes on, this whole situation, I think, again, it's a grant called a pension, and whatever changed in the past and the future, and it's just, and I'll say this, the minister's defense of it, it didn't help clarify the situation one bit. We have Cascade, I think, on the line. Good morning, caller, you on here? Faizabad, sorry.
Hi, good morning, Sean. Good morning. Good morning, Sinan.
Good morning, caller.
Yeah. First, I want to touch on the Susan Martin issue. Because...
Oh, yes, yeah.
Because the Director of Public Prosecution said he gave the okay to go ahead and charge, and it is normal for him to do that because that, certain evidence would have been presented to him.
Yeah.
But I want to remind you, Sean and Keaton, one of the first things a police does, especially of that such high caliber, knowing that she's not wrong in the incident, or supposedly so, is suppose camera footage that would be taken before the DPP there and then. You don't go back to, I can't see that happening as a seasoned campaigner, a seasoned police officer, but I'm not surprised because she's the same one who went to Barbados. I'm not surprised at all. So clearly, I hate to say this, but I have lost confidence in Roger Gaspard. So did Mr. Manning. Maybe he knew the reason why. The other thing is that the pension, with Donna Cox stood up there with Guardian Media and defended the insertion of that particular part with the $25,000. She defended it. So they all knew it was in the amendment. They knew that.
Very much so.
So to come and flop out here and flip out and flap on, but this government is only about distraction because we have so many issues on the front burner. We have to buy about 30 stoves. If we want to deal with them, we have to buy plenty of stoves to put them on the front burner. So I don't take what you're trying to projection. I mean, listen to Guardian Media, listen to the interview, read the writing, and then you'll come back with another opinion, hopefully.
I actually think, thank you, Kola.
Thank you, Kola.
It's not that I think her defense was what she did was a good thing. I think it was party politics. I think she didn't know what she was doing, and that's why she defended it. And that's why then they had to come the next day and say, well, hold on, you know, scratch all of that. Because I think it was just party politics. We do not bad talk anything that the party does. We must defend it. That's what I think. And again, I could be wrong, but that's what I think. I don't think she knew fully what was going on, right? Just based on my reading situation. So, in part because I have seen this government fight down their defensive stance. They could have fought her position down for a good couple of weeks before they retracted it, or maybe at least a few days before it came to a head in Parliament. But I mean, just look at the SRC situation. They took licks for that all over the media. They're still taking the raise though. Well, they haven't actually formally implemented it, but what was said was said. So that's why even if I am wrong and everybody else is right, I do find it very curious that they move so quickly the next day to just do a complete 180. And I'm curious as to, regardless.
It's because of the public outcry, the backlash. You can't deal
They've
with
gotten
that
backlash
in an
before.
election. Yeah, no, I know the example that you're giving with the Salaries Review Commission. And Sean, listen, nothing is wrong with having an alternate opinion. That's the whole point of having talking point.
Well,
Nothing
exactly.
is wrong with that. But sometimes in expressing your opinion, it comes across, it can come across as though it's a defense or a justification for absolute manure and nonsense. And I'm using that word because it's so frustrating what we have received, particularly this week, from members of the cabinet in relation to all that is happening. And from Donna Cox and from the Attorney General, you know, honestly speaking, Sean, you're taking a hike in your salary. That's going to benefit cabinets and their pockets. You are speaking about altering the government grant. That's going to affect how many thousands of citizens in Trinidad and Tobago.
That's fair.
And I think that is why, you know, they have to adjust based off of what the public opinion is.
I mean, they did increase the price of gas and then no one rioted yet, but we have Faizabad, I think, back on the line. Caller, good morning.
John?
Yes.
Yes. You know, you're saying party politics, and I want to agree with you. But the thing is that they also inserted that they wanted to throw a public servant under the bus. So I don't know if they would go to that length to throw a public servant under the bus in defense of the party politics.
Yeah.
Yes? So I don't buy that. The other thing is that what made them retract it so early is the avalanche that was on social media. The entire social media platform were bombarded with this, you know, and they know it has political consequences. That's the only reason why. Okay?
Thank you, caller. I'll say this. Not that it's impossible for them to scapegoat a public servant, but it would kind of make the situation look worse after the AG said, I bear responsibility, right? And he didn't name the public servant. They can't come wrong now, and maybe they'll try and do it in a very secretive manner, but if that public servant comes out and says I was victimized after the fact, that would look even worse because the AG said up front, I bear responsibility. Well, you bear responsibility can't be used. You can't bear responsibility and scapegoat someone at the same time. So to some extent now, it would be subjective if the Attorney General would have, you know, you have to ask the question. And I think it would be up to subjective determination. Was that statement then rendered to be a lie in hindsight if they then try and scapegoat a public servant? But we have to see how that will unfold. Not saying that it's not possible for it to happen in some form or fashion, one way or the other. I don't know if we have, well, it is way past the time. I know that we have entertained calls after this point in the past. Mr. San Fernando, we might have to wait until next week. We will have shows Monday and Tuesday before Christmas, so you could call in to make that last point with regards to the situation. Maybe it is with the investigation or with regards to the commentary from one Philip Edward Alexander or what have you. But that'll have to be done on Monday. Keaton, any last words? I think you're muted.
I was. My apologies. I didn't even get to comment on the case involving Suzette Martin and how unfortunate that with all that's happening, didn't get to. She really seems like a deputy commissioner of police with nothing much good to say going for her, nothing but her actions. Honestly speaking, that is something that we have to talk about. We can't forget about that. I find it amazing how police officers in Trinidad and Tobago, I don't know, when they're charged, especially an individual who, when they were charged for dangerous driving, was also the head of the Professional Standards Bureau.
I know.
It's not that I lost confidence in Roger Gaspard. It's just that the explanation, boy, I have so many questions. But
listen,
as you said, we out of time.
I could accept the explanation. I just want to know why it took so long to watch film. I don't understand why it took a year.
I can't understand how there's enough
and a
evidence
half.
to charge an individual, and then all of a sudden there's not enough evidence to go forward with the case. You have enough evidence to charge, right? But then upon further review, oh wait, hold up, never mind. We got to reverse this decision.
Well, to be fair, what was the point of charging her? Like, if she continued to be the head of the PSP, what was the point of charging her?
If an individual gets knocked down and passes away because of that, the driver could be charged with manslaughter, right? In fact, oftentimes that's the case. Even if it's accidental, it could still be charged with manslaughter because an individual has lost their life. Now, I'm not saying at law, but this is my understanding based off of previous explanations. This is a boy who received fractures to his feet. He did not pass away or nothing like that. But I want to see that video, boy. I really want to see that video. But like I said, I'm no lawyer, so...
I wish someone could sue just so that we could get the video in discovery.
Once Suzette Martin, it works out in your favor.
Listen, I'm willing to believe Roger Gaspard because I don't think he would do such a blatant lie that could be easily disproven, except why did it take a year and a half to watch a film? I don't understand why it took so long.
He clearly didn't watch a film the first time. He watched a film the first time.
He watched a film.
And then a year and a half later, he watched the film. But anyway, sure. That's
all right,
it.
yeah.
That's it. I think we could all look forward to just closing off this week. And I think we look forward to the weekend. And I really hope...
no pun intended.
No pun intended. Believe you me, there are some individuals that hope I have absolutely no hope for. But
oh gosh,
as I said, may this weekend be a good weekend. May we all be safe, and may we all meet again on Monday morning for AM Prime and for Talking Point. Today is a good day to have a good day, and please be safe out there. Help yourself, your situations as best as possible, and all of us trying to be safe out there.
Remember your allegiance to the Republic and to each other. It's nice to be nice, folks. We'll see you next week. Stay safe. Bye-bye.
WESN